I'm actually from Jaffa, and I currently live in Amman, Jordan. So I'm a third generation Palestinian refugee. I think it's important to include, Palestinians living in the diaspora. There's 6 million Palestinians outside of Palestine, and I think, they should be a part of the conversation because the right of return is a really big part of our struggle.
Exactly.
So when Ben Gurion mentioned that the old will die and the young will forget, he was mistaken because there's so many youth who are so connected to Palestine, even though they've never entered it. Because of my activism and my artwork against Israel, I'm actually not allowed to enter Palestine. So I've never actually been there, but I'm very passionate about this cause and I'm very passionate about the struggle. So the first thing that I wanted to say is when we're talking about the annexation, I think it's important to kind of have it in a narrative of that it's not just this one-time thing. It's a part of an imperialistic and colonialist system that has affected, all the world. So I think white supremacy has affected India at some point. It affects Palestine. It affects Black Americans. So it's all connected in this white supremacy system of oppression. And as Ms. Amal mentioned, the narrative for Zionism has always been to expel the Palestinians. There was never an idea of keeping Palestinians or having a two-state. We see this throughout history. Even the United Nations considered Zionism as a form of racism. And most recently, Netanyahu declared that as long as he's there won't be a Palestine. So this is a colonialist project. It's not simply a state annexing some land. It's a project that has always aimed to expel Palestinians from historic Palestine. Now, just to introduce myself a little, I'm an artist and I use art as a way to highlight the oppression of Palestinians. And so when we're talking about annexation, when we're talking about colonialism, we need to talk about the people that are being affected. And so I like to highlight, the suffering of Palestinians. So for example, civilians being targeted by bombs in Gaza. For example, Ahmed Dawabshi, whose family was killed due to settler violence. Administrative detention, where basically Israel can just throw anyone in jail without a charge. And there are so many prisoners currently serving administrative detention. Racist laws that apply to, Israeli citizens of Arab and Palestinian origin within Israel, that actually affect the Israeli citizens who are Palestinian. Detention for children, which is Israel is probably one of the only countries in the world that still detains and throws children into jail. The targeting of medics and the targeting of journalists as well. Even autistic individuals. This is an occupation that is brutal and it does not care about humanity. And I also do work within the Gaza refugee camp in Jordan. And so I'm very connected with, the refugees here in Jordan as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of annexation. A lot of people are thinking that this is something new, but this has actually been happening even before 1948. So, the annexation of East Jerusalem in 1967, the Syrian Golan Heights in 1981, most recently, the annexation plan, which aims to add 30% of the West Bank into the state of Israel. There have been 130 formal settlements and 100 informal settlements since 1967. So imagine the great number of illegal settlements that are currently on Palestinian land. And so we can see from the maps that Palestine has just been getting smaller and smaller, and Israel completely disregards any international law. And its plan is basically to piece up Palestinian land and to have settlements scattered within Palestinian lands so that we don't have one unified Palestine. And this has always been their plan. So with annexation, it's that idea of, the extension of a colonialist project. And you can see this all across Palestine. So I believe that Palestine is all of historic Palestine. And I think it's important for us to use that language because oftentimes we divide ourselves, Palestinians of 1948, Gaza, the West Bank, it's all Palestine. And so you see racist ethnic policies, even within Israel. You see colonization and apartheid within the West Bank. You see incremental genocide in Gaza, and the diaspora outside of Palestine are, refugees scattered in Lebanon, Jordan, even Syria, and they're deprived of the right of return. So as I kind of mentioned, there are so many ethnic racist policies. They imprison children, there's administrative detention, and the apartheid wall. All of these are 21st century apartheid strategies. Now, when we talk about occupation versus colonization. I prefer using the word colonization, simply because occupation is something that the Israeli left uses as a way to say that before 1967, there was never any occupation. That's when it started to happen. Before that, Israel was a legitimate state and everything was going fine. But when we say the word colonization, we're saying that it was actually a project that began in the late 1800s and was, this European Zionist project that has been causing the suffering of Palestinians for before even 1948. I believe it's an extension, and these type of deals are an extension of this colonization. So the Balfour Declaration, the Oslo Agreement, and then now the deal of the century all leads to the displacement of Palestinians. And just to kind of talk about the deal of the century just a little bit, I actually went through the deal of the century, and it's actually a joke. Like, the terms that are placed within the peace deal of the century are ridiculous, in that it's an extension and a continuation of the colonization. It's not granting Palestinians a free, autonomous Palestine. It actually, retains control, not only military control, but also control on education, control on resources, control on tourism, basically making Palestine a business venture for Israel to kind of profit off. So it's a ridiculous deal, and it shouldn't even be legitimized or spoken of in a serious matter. Now to talk more about the annexation. So the annexation plans to, take parts of the Jordan Valley and the northern Dead Sea region and annex it into the state of Israel. And this area holds 65,000 Palestinians and 11,000 illegal settlers. And what an annexation means is that they're going to confiscate land that is property of Palestinians. And this is a very agricultural area. So their whole livelihood is the land. They're going to demolish homes. We're going to see more settler violence, loss of agricultural land and work. There's going to be no connection between Jordan and Palestine. So all of the borders between Jordan and Palestine will be controlled by Israel. And 1967 Palestine will be completely surrounded by settlements. All of them are going to be surrounded by settlements, and this is a huge security risk. And in terms of the citizens living there and what's going to happen to them, so Palestinians who are living on the annexed areas are not going to be granted Israeli citizenship. They're not going to have freedom of movement. They're not going to be allowed to expand or build, and they're going to be taxed as well. For Jewish settlers living in that area, they're going to be granted Israeli citizenship. They're going to be granted freedom of movement in all of Israel, and they will have the ability to expand their settlements as they've been doing. So this is kind of what I wanted to present to this conversation. And I'm so glad that we're talking about this in a way where it kind of really, it kind of investigates the roots of, this colonialist project. And really, this isn't an isolated incident. And the freedom of Palestinians is connected to the freedom of all oppressed people all around the world. And I'm so glad that, Indian activists are so passionate about having this conversation. And thank you so much for including me.
Great. That was great. Lina, that was great. Thanks both Amal and Lina.